Welcome to the final of our talks, our e-learning presentations for National Coin Week. My name is Andy Dickus. I'm a museum specialist here at the ANA in Colorado Springs, and I also coordinate National Coin Week. This year, the theme was Our Money, Our Heritage, Our America. So it was a week-long celebration of how coins, numismatics in general, tell the story of our country and help form our national identity. So we have a great presentation that goes right with this tonight, everyone. It should be a real treat. We have Neil Musante with us, and he's going to be talking to us about some of the earliest medals struck in or for America and how they reflect our values, customs, traditions, beliefs, and institutions. A little bit about Neil. You probably know that he is one of the foremost American medal experts. He is the editor of the MCA Advisory, the magazine of the Medal Collectors of America. He is the author of the Medallic work of John Adams Bolen and the 2-volume Medallic Washington. He is currently working on a book about the life and times of Charles Cushing Wright. So, Neil, without further ado, I will pass things off to you.
Well, thank you, Andy. And thank all of you for taking time on a Friday night to join us. The title of my presentation tonight is Venerate the Plough. And this kind of came about when Doug Mudd asked me if I would be interested in participating. He asked if I would do something on Washington, and I obviously thought I could do that, but I had this idea rattling around in the back of my head about this medal that I had seen probably 7 or 8 years ago. I came across this medal online and it intrigued me, and I bear with me, I have to figure out how to move the slide forward to the next slide. There we go. I had come across this gold medal online, and I became very curious about it, and had given it a lot of thought over the years, and just kind of wondered what this medal was really all about. And it's very early. It was awarded in 1786 by the Philadelphia Society for Promoting Agriculture. It was given to a Colonel George Morgan for an essay that he did on how to design a proper farmyard. While the medal was awarded in 1786, it wasn't actually struck until 1788. It is gold. It was struck from a die, but only an obverse die. So the planchet was cast. The medal was struck with an obverse die, and then the reverse of the medal is totally engraved. And it's about 2 inches, a little over 2 inches in diameter, and it has the theme Venerate the Plough on it. And obviously that simply means, cherish or appreciate, or maybe not worship, but appreciate the value and the importance of the plow, especially in a new country with a lot of land, where survival really depended on somebody's ability to care for themselves or take care for themselves. So the imagery on the medal is very intriguing to me. But before I get into that, Venerate the Plough, the first use of that phrase was in a poem that was published in 1728 by a guy named James Thomson in England. And it's a rather long and difficult poem. It's called The Seasons, and this is spring. The spring portion of the poem was published in 1728. And in it, he uses the phrase Venerate the Plough. And that's basically been the first traced use of that phrase. The design for the medal was done by an engraver by the name of James Trenchard. Trenchard was an early engraver who did a lot of work for the Columbian magazine, and there are two two or three elements of this design that really intrigue me. First of all, the farmer holding the plow is referred to as industry. And the goddess standing behind him is the goddess Demeter, and she's usually portrayed carrying a cornucopia or a sheaf of wheat. There are 13 stars above her head, and the sun is shining down from above, and life is wonderful. And there are two very interesting things about the design here. The first is that there's a face in the sun, and that's why I did a little enlargement on the side there. So hopefully you can all see that there is a face engraved into the sun. And the oxen just look like two of the happiest critters on the planet. They just seem like they're loving life. And I just thought that was rather cute. But the magazine article was published in October 1786. And the medal, again, like I said, was presented in 1788 to Colonel Morgan. Morgan was an interesting guy. He was actually an Indian agent and had served for a number of years with the Indians of Western Pennsylvania and Ohio, and was well respected and well liked, and was just an interesting character. The Indians of Western Pennsylvania were in the early days, about 1756, were kind of at odds with the settlers of Pennsylvania. The farther west the settlers moved, the more violent the confrontations. The Indians would raid and burn villages and take prisoners, women and children, and hold them hostage. And one of the very first medals ever really to be struck in this country was called the Katanning Medal. And it was a medal where Colonel John Armstrong raided one of the Indian villages in Katanning in 1756 and burned the village and killed a number of Indians, although apparently most of them escaped with their captors. It probably wasn't quite the victory that it was made out to be. But what's very interesting about this medal is actually the reverse of the medal, which shows the seal of the city of Philadelphia, or the corporation of the city of Philadelphia. And there's four quadrants, and the upper left quadrant shows two hands clasped in a handshake, a classic gesture. The sheaf of wheat, the ship represents commerce, and the scales represent justice. The item that's most intriguing to me is the two clasped hands. In 1756, or the early 1700s, the gesture of shaking hands that we all kind of take for granted nowadays was actually not that prominent of a thing. But the Quakers of Philadelphia would shake hands with each other, and it was a gesture of friendship, appreciating equalities, meeting their equal, and a sign of respect. And so just keep that in mind for a moment. The next medal that was struck the following year, the Treaty of Easton medal, was kind of a peace medal that came about when the settlers and the Indians of Western Pennsylvania began to, live more closely together. What was really going on was the start of the 7 Years' War, and the Indian tribes had a tendency to change sides. One day they'd be aligned with the French, the next with the English, and I think this medal was struck to commemorate the fact that they had now aligned themselves with the English, and so they had stopped raiding the settlements of Western Pennsylvania. the thing about this medal that intrigues me the most is if you look at the sun, there is a face in the sun. And obviously, that seems obvious, Providence is looking down on this with approval, I guess. And, but it's a theme that, or a device that appeared quite a bit in subsequent years on other medals and devices. So just to give you a sense of more modern times, at the left is what is now the seal of the city of Philadelphia. And you can see in the upper third of the shield is the plow. The sheaf of wheat probably became adapted and became the plow. In the middle is a painting of the corporations of Philadelphia's seal from the early 1700s. And again, it repeats the themes that you saw on the Katanning medal. And then at the right, sometime in about 1780 to 1790, the state of Pennsylvania devised their seal. And you can see that the plow forms an important section in that. I'm going to jump ahead now to just for a moment to the Society of the Cincinnati. And at the very left is one of the badges of the Cincinnati, and you can see a man, Washington, standing there, and his left hand is on a plow. He's in the image at center. We see Washington surrendering his sword, or not surrendering, that's the wrong word. He was exchanging his sword for the plow, and you can actually see him handing the sword off to the representative from the government, and he's put his hand on the plow. What's also interesting is that he's wearing a hat in this image, and I didn't mention it when I was talking about the Venerate the Plough image, but the hat is a very important aspect of the farmer. It just represents him, and Washington wearing the hat shows that he has left public life and returned to the farm. And then, of course, the seal at right is a more recent one, and probably late 1800s, early 1900s. And here again, Washington turning over his sword. Now, just for the heck of it, I decided to Google Translate Societas Cincinnatorum Instituta. I thought, okay, I wonder what that really translates to. And you'll be glad to know that Google Translate shows it as established a company of locksmiths. So I thought that was kind of amusing. But just a little aside, I'm sure that's a bum translation. But anyway, I thought it was funny. Here again, we see a blow up of that central portion of the Society of Cincinnati medal, with Washington turning over his sword and his hand on the plow. And in lots and lots of images from then on, we see Washington in this mode of surrendering power. The engraving at left by Alexander Lawson. In the background, you can see Mount Vernon. And if you look closely, there's a plow being drawn by two oxen. The Richmond statue done by Houdon in 1795 shows Washington actually standing next to a plow. That odd looking device on the side is some kind of version of a plow that Houdon must have concocted. So anyway, between 1783 and 1788, the states were busy trying to ratify the Constitution. And it became widely reported in the press, all of the debates and dealings and arguments and so on and so forth. And the coinage of that period reflects some of these images that we've seen previously on some of the medals that I've just shown you. The Nova Constellatio at the top left, we see the all-seeing eye among a ray of stars. The New Jersey coppers at center and at right, showing the Plough. The Plough also was a symbol in the state seal of New Jersey, which is also adopted around that time. The Vermont copper in the lower left is quite intriguing in that if you look closely at the ground line, you can see the rising sun, and it's a face with the eyes and the nose and the mouth rising up above the ground, up above the landscape, and there's a plow in the foreground. So those two symbols repeat frequently. And then, of course, the Fugios, I think it would be amusing to collect them by face variety. How many varieties of faces in the sun can you find? This is a particularly interesting example. The press covered the conventions that were held to vote on the Constitution, and in each time a state gave the approval for the Constitution, there was huge celebration and massive parades were held. And if you read the newspaper accounts, the Plough was carried and paraded and led many of the parades. And it became a very important symbol. It symbolized America's humility and a humbleness to work the soil, and it was a virtue to be a farmer, somebody who could grow and till the soil, and it just became a very big what's the word? It just became a very big deal to farm the land and to grow crops and share them with others. In any event, I'm going to jump forward a few years to and then back to the Indian peace medals. And what we see in these engraved medals by Richardson, dated 1792, 1793, and 1795, obviously Washington exchanging pipe with a Native American. And in the background on all three, we see the ox and the plow and the farmer with the hat. It was an important theme to Washington when he, in 1795, while he was president, he made an address to the Cherokee Nation. The address was later published and printed and posted throughout the city, and copies were distributed and translated into Cherokee for the Native Americans. And I'd like to just read part of it here. This is August 29th, 1796. Beloved Cherokees, many years have passed away since the white people first came to America. In that long space of time, many good men have considered how the condition of the Indian natives of the country might be improved. I also have thought much on this subject and anxiously wished that the various Indian tribes, as well as their neighbors, the white people, might enjoy in abundance all the good things which make life comfortable and happy. I have considered how this could be done and have discovered but one path that can lead them to that desirable situation. Some among you already experience the advantages of keeping cattle and hogs. Let all keep them and increase their numbers, and you will ever have plenty of meat. To them add sheep, and they will give you clothing as well as food. By using the plough, you can vastly increase your crops of corn. You can also grow wheat, which makes the best bread, and other useful grain. To these, you will easily add flax and cotton to be sold to the neighboring white people, or made by your own women into clothing for yourselves. Your wives and daughters can soon learn to spin and weave. Beloved Cherokees, what I have recommended to you, I am myself going to do. After a few moons are passed, I shall leave the great town and retire to my farm. There I shall attend to the means of increasing my cattle, sheep, to the growing of corn, wheat, and other grain, and to the employing of women in spinning and weaving, all which I have recommended to you, that you may be as comfortable and happy as plenty of food, clothing, and other good things can make you. Beloved Cherokees, when I have retired to my farm, I shall hear of you, and it will give me great pleasure to know that you have taken my advice and are walking in the path which I have now described. But before I retire, I shall speak to my beloved man, the Secretary of War, to get prepared some medals to be given to such Cherokees as by my advice shall best deserve them. The medals, of course, that he described in his talk are the Seasons medals. Now, the Seasons medals are probably misnamed. That's a name that W. Elliott Woodward came up with in about 1860. But the medal at the upper left shows the sower, and in the background you see the man with the plow and the oxen. In the middle is the shepherd tending to the sheep and the cattle, and in the upper right is the spinning and weaving by the women and the care of the children. And, you know, I realize that times have changed quite a bit, quite dramatically, and this is not to be offensive in any way, but that's simply the way things were in 1798. Women were expected to work in the home and to do these things, and the men were expected to work outside and do the plowing and the hoeing. An interesting point is if you look at the shepherd medal, and you can see inside the door, you see this domestic scene with where the women are caring for the children. But this was Washington's great idea for the Indian nations, that they should basically adopt the ways and the path of the white man. And he had these medals made. They were designed by John Trumbull, the painter. They were, the dies were engraved by an English, or actually a German engraver by the name of Conrad Kukler, who worked in England at the time for Matthew Boulton. The medals were struck by Matthew Boulton and they were shipped over to America. Unfortunately, they didn't really arrive until probably close to 1800. So they weren't widely distributed. Lewis and Clark took a supply of them with them on their adventures out, their explorations in search of the Northwest Passage. And unfortunately, the medals did not prove that popular with the Indians. The Indians actually liked and preferred the larger medals with the image of the Great White Father. So, but that said, the season medals really reflect what people felt at the time was the path to happiness, not just for the Indians, but for the Americans who settled in the West and were moving ever further west. But the plow then, as the years went by, has appeared on many other tokens. The one at left here is called Catch Club, and it's a 12.5 cent. So it's a 1-bit metal as opposed to a 2-bit metal. And but you can see they use the seal of the city or the state of Pennsylvania in the obverse, and you see the plow in the middle of the shield with 13 stars around it, which is pretty much how you identify that it came from Philadelphia. And what a catch club was is that's kind of interesting. You've heard the expression a catchy tune. Well, a catch was a little song that you would sing. 3 or 4 people would sing the song in kind of a rondo way, you know, like row, row, row your boat. But it wasn't exactly a rondo. It was a little bit different, but they became very, very popular in the 1700s. And this catch club, I suspect this little tiny medalette was a prize that I don't know where you would spend it for 12.5 cents, but I do think it was something that they were given as a prize to those who performed well. The center token, I'm really not quite sure what that is. Somehow I failed to put it into Medallic Washington. It's got an upside down G, but it's an interesting one-sided piece where you see the plow and the GW, and it was probably contemporary to the period in which Washington resigned his commission from the army. And then Speed the Plow became a popular token later in the 1800s, 1830s to 1850s. And in fact, also very popular in Canada. A lot of Canadian tokens have plows on them and the word Speed the Plow. And the meaning is fairly obvious. But you can literally find dozens of tokens now with plows on them, and they become somewhat ubiquitous. The society, the Agricultural Society of Philadelphia, reissued their medal at some point. And here you see the happy oxen pulling a plow with nobody guiding it. But this is apparently a fairly rare medal. And just to compare it to the original, there's no industry and there's no goddess of plenty to guide them. But it was an interesting attempt, I guess, to revive the. I suspect the medal on the left is probably 1850s, possibly a little later, but it's so scarce that nobody really knows when it was done. And I'm going to jump back now to 1800. Thomas Jefferson is president. He sent Lewis and Clark on their adventure, and they've taken some of the season medals with them. And the medal at the left was the Jefferson inaugural medal. And I've just included this simply because it was John Reich's first medal, and it's a medal that Henry Vogt, the mint coiner at the time, actually subsidized John Reich so he could make this medal. It met with Thomas Jefferson's approval, and it helped him secure a very underpaid position as Robert Scott's assistant, and Reich really was doing all the work, and Robert Scott was sharing his salary with Reich. But Robert Scott, I think, was fairly wealthy. But in any event, the medal is rare, and it's just an attractive piece of work. It has nothing to do with the Plough medal or anything else. It has more to do with Jefferson. And you can see the Indian Peace Medal at right, also struck at that time. And this is the first use of the clasped hands that I believe was suggested by the use of that on the Katanning medal. And they continued using the clasped hands for many years. Of course, the medals are probably misnamed. They're not really Indian peace medals. They're more like treaty medals. And I don't want to get into an argument about how effective they were or what they were used for or whether they were used appropriately. But they just represent some of the earliest medals from our mint, and the use of the clasped hands, I think, is significant. They used the clasped hands on the Indian peace medal for quite a number of years. Then something interesting happened. About the time Millard Fillmore became president, they returned to the use of the plough on the peace medal. And the medal at left, you can see on the reverse, the gentleman and the Indian talking, and that device that is behind both of them is actually a plow. You see the axe in front, and the Buchanan medal is quite a piece of work where you see the violence of constant warfare compared to the peace of farming and living peacefully, tilling the soil. So here we have now a horse pulling the plow, and you can see an Indian in a headdress, the suggestion being, I guess, that this should become their way of life. And then, of course, my favorite is the Benjamin Harrison one, where the plow at the base of the medal is indicative of progress. So many years later, we've come back to using the plow as the recommendation for how Indian tribes should live. I'm going to jump back again. Also, I want to talk a little bit about another medal that was very, it's just a very beautiful medal, the Columbia Washington medal. And the reason I've included it in the presentation is on the reverse. You can see the names in the center, but around the outside, you read the fitted in Boston, the Pacific Ocean, and then up at the top, there's a sun. And believe it or not, there's a little face in that sun. And I just thought that was very, very interesting. Now, this was a medal that was produced to promote trade out in Washington, Oregon, and the two ships, the Columbia and the Lady Washington, sailed around South America up to the Washington state, well, what is now the state of Washington, the Northwest Territories, to do their trading, and actually circumnavigated the globe, eventually made it back to Boston. I can't remember in what year, but it's actually a nice medal, and the ships are fairly well done considering the year that this medal was struck, 1787. So the next medal was actually written about in the Rural Magazine and Literary Gazette. You can see the visual engraving here, a man with the plow wearing a hat. Whoops. And the premiums discussed in this article were for the Mass Charitable Mechanics Association of 1820. And what it says in the small print is that a medal of the value of $12 was awarded to Mr. Addison Bacon, Hanover Street, for the best made pair of chaise wheels. And the medal that was awarded to Mr. Bacon was this kind of hideous. Actually, it's not hideous. It's just crude metal, but it's very, very thick. So what's interesting is that to the value of $12, the metal is 60 millimeters. It's 10 millimeters thick, and it weighs 9.45 ounces or 8.62 troy ounces. With silver at that time at roughly $1.27 an ounce, 9.45 ounces would equal $12. So here was the medal that was awarded to $12, and two others were awarded, one to the value of $8 and one to the value of $6. So they were probably simply thinner in terms of just how thick they were. There would be less silver in them. But I also found this interesting, that there are some design elements that they have in common with the Columbia Washington medal. And basically it's the way the words are, the lettering is spread all around the outside rim on both medals, and then the scene is the central vignette, and then pretty much the same on the reverse. Now, the theory is that Joseph Callender was the engraver on the Columbia Washington medal, which may be, and my theory is that he was also the engraver on the Mass Charitable Mechanics first medal, because in 1820, when this medal was made, Joseph Callender was still alive and still listed in the Boston directory as an engraver. So it very well could be his work. The alien-looking creature on the front of it is a little amusing. But the other thing on this medal that's intriguing is the beehive. The beehive became a symbol for industry, for hard work and industry, and that kind of became a ubiquitous symbol that appeared on many, many medals as the years went by. And so seeing a beehive with bees became, I think in this case, these are mostly school medals. John Sally did an article on these in the advisory a number of years ago. And so I borrowed these images from that article. And the one I like particularly incorporates both of our things, our beehive, and then plow deep while sluggards sleep, and you shall have corn to sell and keep. But this incorporates the plow and the beehive, I guess. So anyway, the political medals also became, users of a number of American symbols, and one that was used widely was that of a snake. And in this context, the snake is kind of a guardian. He's a guardian of the freedom, and the medal at left is probably from the 1850s, but these were done for the Tammany Society. The center medal and the medal at left were done for the Tammany Society of New York, and were Democratic Party. They were medals struck for the, promoting the Democrat ideal. The medal at right was done at the U.S. Mint in 1808. It's another John Reich, and it was made to kind of combat or oppose the Tammany organization, also in New York, and it was called the Washington Benevolent Society. And again, the use of medals now became a political device. So the medal at right is really quite beautiful, and the Federalists would issue booklets and pass them out to recruits, and they would get people to take a pledge that they would support the society and vote Federalist, and then they would be presented with one of these books that had an engraving of George Washington. It would have a reprint of his farewell address, and there would be a certificate in it signed by the president of the society, and their name would be put on the certificate and numbered. There are dozens of these little books with different engravings and different, but they're an interesting development. And then, of course, the plough came into play on many of these political medals. Here we are by 1844. Henry Clay, the ashland farmer, and here's the same old coon, OK, with the plough on the front. And in the same election, William Henry Harrison, the People's Choice, and he leaves the plough to save his country. And I'd be willing to bet that William Henry Harrison actually never touched a plow, but that's okay. And then the other one at right shows Henry Clay again, and again the seal shows the plow on the reverse. But it was very virtuous back then for a politician to be of the land, of the farm, to be a humble, hardworking log cabin farmer. And so political medals became, again, you'll find the plow on many political medals. So, and that's the end of my little talk. So if we want to do questions, we can do that. And do I have to turn off my share screen here?
You just did. So
oh, I did.
Good, Neil.
Okay. So there we go. Oops. I think I screwed it up.
Yeah, you can just click share, click on share screen and just stop sharing, I guess.
Let me try it. Yeah, all right, there's share. Oh, here it is. Stop share. Got it.
There we go. All right.
Sorry. Little slow. So.
Well, Neil, that was awesome. So many cool medals that I'd never seen before. Not being an expert like you, obviously, I knew the plow played, a pretty important role, but I'd never delved that far deep into it. Very interesting stuff. There is one person about what percentage do you think, Neil, of the early American medals have a plow on them? I mean, was it just kind of standard?
I can't say that, but it seems like the more, I dig into medals, let's say pre-1830, quite a few of them have plows on them, make a use of the plow, or in either a seal or a coat of arms or whatever it might be. But I think what I was taken by was just that the Indian Peace Medal thing struck, what we call the Indian Peace Medal thing, is what really struck me as I kept looking at these medals, and so.
We have another question, Neil. The season's medals were struck at the Soho Mint in England, but were any other early medals pre-1792 struck in America or elsewhere?
Pre-1792?
I was going to ask that question as well, to kind of piggyback on that question. Just asking you, at what point did either the mint or, private mints in the United States, did they have the capacity to make high quality metals, I guess?
Right. So I actually don't think that the capacity to make high quality metals really began to develop until the 1820s. I think that the medal of the Massachusetts Charitable Mechanics Association is rather crude, but sometime in about 1826 or 28, Christian Gorbrecht created a couple of medals that were actually pretty darn good. I suspect they were struck at the mint, though. I don't know that he had any of his own private equipment back then. But and of course, by 1826, we have the Erie Canal medal. Before that, there was the Gorbrecht Franklin Institute medal, I think 1828, 1826, 1828 for the Franklin Institute, and then the mass manufacturers, and it's the large Archimedes medal. Again, that was struck, I believe, at the mint, as was the Franklin Institute medal. But again, late 1820s, I think, is when we began to have the ability to strike good high quality medals. We lacked artisans. I mean, the die engravers that existed really were self-taught. They didn't know, exactly what they were doing, I guess, and they had to learn as they went along. And so a lot of the medals pre 1820s were just engraved.
Kind of a similar question to this. You mentioned that the Seasons medals were produced at the Soho Mint. Did Matthew Bolton create more medals for the United States?
Yeah. He possibly did. I can't think of any off the top of my head right at the moment, but there probably are a couple that he might have done that were intended for the U.S. market. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any right at the moment, but there probably are some. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. There's another person here. This might be a little off topic, but what is the earliest medal engraved and struck in the colonies of the U.S., no matter what the quality of it is?
Well, I know there's the Songoose medal. There was a write-up of a medal that was produced during the Revolution, and I don't really remember the details of it that well. But sure, I know that there probably were earlier medals engraved prior to the Revolution, prior to, probably from day one. And I know that there's a Washington medal, a Mohican or a Micmac Washington medal. That's probably pretty early. But again, yeah, it's hard. I'm sorry, I just can't off the top of my head think of what the earliest one would be. But that's a good question, so I'll figure it out. I'll figure out which one it is at some point. So
here's kind of an interesting question. Is the Plough still prominent in medallic art nowadays? Or has the nation drifted away from humility? Or is there something else that is a symbol on more modern medallic art that kind of takes the place of the Plough in terms of a symbol of humility?
I'm not really probably up to speed on modern medallic art as I should be. I'm sure that there are probably symbols that would suggest humility, suggest humble origin. And as soon as we get off this call, I'll probably think of a bunch of them, but I'm sorry I can't come up with anything right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to think as well. Are we just not humble anymore? Yeah, interesting. Anybody else have any questions for Neil? What an awesome presentation. Very, very interesting.
Well, thank you.
No, thank you, Neil. So if there's no more questions, everyone, this concludes the last night of our National Coin Week e-learning series, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I see by the participants that a lot of you out there have joined us for multiple presentations. Please be aware that we have a new program called Numismatics, which is a very regular, and the times escape me, but check it out on money.org, where we have a really good lineup upcoming for our e-learning academy called Numismatics. Be sure to check out those as well.
Hey, Andy, I just thought of something. Do you mind if I say one more thing?
No, please.
Anybody who is not a member of Metal Collectors of America, you should perhaps visit our website, metalcollectors.org, and check out what we're all about, and perhaps look at some of our past publications and see if you might have an interest in becoming a member. We're a small organization, and we do need members. We need articles. We need folks. We have a monthly, or I think it's monthly, social hour, which is a Zoom call that is quite popular. And we also put out an annual medal. The Metal Collectors of America does a medal every year, and they've gotten really, really good. They've gotten really interesting, and it feels good to be a part of something that is encouraging participation in what we are all about. So I would encourage everybody to please visit metalcollectors.org and think about becoming a member of the MCA. Thank you, Andy.
A great organization.
Letting me do that pitch.
Absolutely. Pitch away. All right, folks, thanks again for joining us tonight. Make sure to check the schedule for upcoming e-learning presentations. And happy, tomorrow will be the last day of National Coin Week. We've got a big open house here at the A&A Money Museum. Try to go out and promote the hobby in your community. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.